300. Anybody? You heard it a little bit? Okay, we got one person. How about the Battle of Thermopylae? Anybody heard of that? Oh yeah, we've all heard about that. Battle of Thermopylae. So you got 300 Greeks. These up. I guess I better get the microphone.
I don't think it's a lot of us right.
Oh, okay. We'll do that. I can stand over here then. So we got 300 Greeks battling against this huge, ginormous Persian army. And they've got to stand in the gap. They know they're going to die, but they've got to hold the line, because if they don't, Greece is going to get wiped out, annihilated. What if that had happened? There'd be no idea of democracy. Western civilization as we know it wouldn't even exist. But 300 men stood in the gap and held back this army. This army was so big, some people say hundreds of thousands. Some people say it was a 1 million-man army. But they couldn't squeeze through this little gap. It was very narrow. And so the Spartans were able to put 2 men up there and hold back an entire army. Some people say the Persian army was so big that when they would go to a creek to drink the water, there'd be no more water left. I mean, can you imagine? Like, that's a big army. How do you get enough water for somebody like that? And these 300 mighty Spartans stood in the gap, and then every time the Persians would come up, they'd jab, 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 kill a few, and then when they would get tired, they'd go to the end of the line, and then the rest of the 2 more Spartans would come up. And they did this for a couple of days, and it probably could have lasted even longer if one of the Greeks had not betrayed them and showed the Persian army a way to sneak around the backside. And so it was betrayal that ultimately led to the end of these 300. But isn't it amazing? I mean, there's movies about the Battle of Thermopylae. I mean, everybody knows about the Battle of Thermopylae. Yeah. And countless people have been inspired by this heroic stand that these men made against tyranny. And wouldn't it be great if there was like a group of Americans in history who made such a stand and gave their lives? Well, son of a gun, there is. The Maryland 400. And so in August 1776, George Washington made a big mistake. And he divided his army and he put half of it on Long Island. And so some people call this the Battle of Long Island, some people call it the Battle of Brooklyn. But it's the biggest battle that took place in the American Revolution, was on this island. And what happened was Washington made a mistake, and they did not guard their flanks very well. And so there was a pass, just like the Battle of Thermopylae, and there was a betrayal. Some loyalists showed them the way of how to get through the Jamaica Pass. And so here come the British. They had a huge army. And as a gentleman who last spoke at one of our prior meetings about this battle, we're talking about the same battle where the miracle of August 1776, same thing. And here come the British. They're going to outflank us. The British had brought over 32,000 soldiers to America. That is a lot of people back then. There was no city in the United States of America that had a population size greater than 32,000. But these guys put them on boats. I mean, how do you feed such a massive army? Amazing. Brought them halfway around the world, and they're over here, and a good chunk of them are on Long Island coming to kill poor George Washington and our great army. So here they come. And it looks like Washington's about to get outflanked. Now, think about this for a second. What if the British had won this day? There'd be no George Washington. There'd be no American Revolution. What if there was no United States of America? Who would have defeated the Germans in World War I? Who would have defeated the Germans in World War II? Who would have defeated the Japanese in World War II? Tyranny would probably reign over the entire world, and probably here, but for the United States of America. So many good things have come from America, not just apple pie. I love apple pie. Baseball. There'd probably be no baseball. There'd be no football. there was a lot on the line here where these guys stood up. Now, at the beginning of the American Revolutionary War, most American soldiers were not professionals. In fact, every time Americans got captured, the Hessians would love to make fun of the American soldiers. And they would say, "Tell me, what is your profession?" And the American soldier would say something like, "Well, I make shoes for a living." They would laugh, "Ha ha 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 ha." They just had such disdain for these farmers and these shoemakers who actually thought they could be soldiers, because the Hessians and the British, they were professionals. They were soldiers every single day of the year. They knew how to reload their weapons. They didn't run when their friend's head got chopped off by a cannon like the Americans did. Americans weren't used to that, and so Americans would run. But the United States Army was very fortunate that the Maryland 400, these guys were well trained. They were wealthy guys, they were well armed, and they didn't run. Thank God they didn't run. Because as the British Army had outflanked us, it looked like everything was lost. Our commanding general, his name was Lord Stirling. That's not his last name, and I think his last name was Andrews, but it's kind of a funny story. He thought he was royalty in England. He thought he was Lord Stirling because his grandfather was the Earl of Stirling. And so he actually went over to Scotland and filed a lawsuit, which as an attorney I love, to have himself declared officially Lord Stirling, and the Scottish people agree that he should be Lord of Stirling. Well, he didn't stop there. He wanted to take it one step further. So he went to London with his lawsuit. And basically in London they said, "Listen, your guy ran, okay? He immigrated to America under some circumstances. You are not Lord Stirling." So this was something that really chapped his rear end, that they would not give him this honor that he was Lord Stirling. So he hated the British. And he's in charge of this wing of the American Army, and he was a very brave man. He knew what he had to do. So what do you do when an army that's way larger than yours is about to wipe you out? You attack. And they did. And so one of the strategies that George Washington was hoping for was that the British were going to repeat the same stupid mistake that they made at the Battle of Bunker Hill, where they threw so many men into the American line of fire. They lost a lot of soldiers, and this didn't go over well back home. You know, yeah, you won the hill, you took it, but at what price? And so they were hoping these stubborn, arrogant, bad British would repeat the same mistake. They weren't going to do that again. That wasn't going to happen. General Howe on the British side, very smart guy, very good with the tactics. Wasn't going to happen. So here come these Maryland 400, and this battle where they took place, it took place over a period of about an hour, okay? And many historians call this the most precious hour in American history, because had it gone the other way, you guys wouldn't be sitting here right now. And so they attacked, and they got slaughtered, and they attacked again, and more guys got slaughtered. They attacked again, and they got slaughtered. 6 times they attacked the British. And eventually Howe said, "Something's going on here, let's pull back." Thank God General Howe pulled back. Of the 400 Marylanders, 257 died on that battlefield. And so many schools across the nation have been named after them, there's streets named after them. No, I'm kidding, that's not true. We don't know their names. Isn't that terrible? We don't even know where they are buried. How can this be? You know, when I first started reading this, I was flabbergasted. How do we not know their names? How do we not know where they're buried? We wouldn't exist but for these guys. What happened? Well, I think, and this is just Jeff Kelly theory, and whenever you hear me say this is just Jeff Kelly theory, we're treading in dangerous water here because I could be completely wrong. But there was an amazing event that happened. So after General Howe pulls back, it gives Washington time to retreat. They start pulling men off of Brooklyn and getting them back to safety in Manhattan. Thank you, Lord. But there were still a good number of them that were left that morning. And what Benjamin Talmadge, who was there, refers to as a peculiar fog rolled in. Well, that peculiar fog, in my opinion, that was the hand of Almighty God literally covering the American army. He said all of a sudden you couldn't see 6 feet in front of you. And that enabled them to escape. And so that is what most people focus on when they look at the Battle of Long Island. I mean, hand of God, very distracting. I can totally understand that. But I think we should also remember these people, these 400 that gave so much, that put so much on the line for us. And I remember when I was in college, my freshman year, we all had to read the Iliad. And when Homer starts the Iliad off, it'll say name of a soldier, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, from so-and-so, and it just goes on and on and on. And me being a young, not knowing any better freshman, I asked my professor, why is this even here? I mean, who cares? I don't know these people. Why would Homer do this? And I remember the irritation on my professor's face. And he said, I want you to take away a very valuable lesson from this. People matter. And it's real easy to say, 400 soldiers died on this battle. It's a lot more painful when you start reading their names. When you start reading where they lived, who was their father. These were people. And we really should remember that soldiers aren't just numbers. They're people, and war is terribly painful. It is terribly awful. And we should treat that with their sacrifice, with tremendous respect. And we should never forget the names of the people who came before us and fought for our freedom. So, what has been done through the years? Well, as you can imagine, Brooklyn is a lot different today than it was in 1776. It's not 20,000 people in the island of Manhattan. It's more like 20 million in the metro area. So what happened to these soldiers? Why don't we know where they were buried? Well, 1776 was a crazy year. And if any of you guys have a chance, I would encourage you to read David McCullough's book, 1776. That is a great book. And it is full of, wow, a lot of stuff happened. And a lot of stuff had happened fast. And, if this battle had taken place over a 3-day period, maybe we might be more likely to remember their names like we do the Battle of Thermopylae. This took place in an hour. And when these men were killed, they were killed in a very swampy area. So some people have a theory that because it was swampy, because it's high humidity, and because their bodies were literally left to rot, that may be why we don't know where they were buried. The British could have cared less about burying dead American soldiers. So we don't know. There's a stone church where the battle took place, and that building is still there today. And there is a plaque where people think, some of these soldiers might be buried. But there have been some archaeological efforts. A professor from Columbia University, go Lions, that's my school, they did do an archaeological dig in the area, and unfortunately they have found nothing. So we don't know where they're buried. It is a great mystery, but it's so important to remember these guys. Some of the names we have, like General Smallwood, but the names of the actual people, we don't know. We know they were young, we know they came from good families, we know they were well trained, and we know they fought with such passion. So one thing, while I have time, I want to go into a little more detail on another crazy Jeff Kelly theory of why did they fight? Like what? I mean, when I was a kid, I remember sitting in Miss Sutherland's history class, and she said, the cause of the American Revolution was taxation without representation. And I raised my hand and I said, Miss Sutherland, that's completely wrong. It has to be. And I remember her saying, Jeffrey, you are a very mouthy, obnoxious little boy. You'd make a good lawyer someday. And I think she was right. But it really bothered me for so many years. What caused the American Revolution? What would cause these wealthy young men from Maryland to fight with such heart and passion, to know that, like, hey, the British Army's about to annihilate the whole cause, everything's about to get stamped out if you don't give your life, and they did it. And they did it with vigor, and they did it with passion. Why? Well, because of taxation without representation. I don't think so. There's got to be more to the story, because a lot of these people who fought in the American Revolution, our forefathers, these were Christian people, right? And like, you know, so I remember as a kid going to church. I went to church every Sunday. There's a story behind that, but I won't tell it because my mother gets really embarrassed when I do. But she made me go to church every single Sunday. And I remember looking at these men and thinking, what could possibly motivate these guys that I'm looking at to pick up a gun and go kill a soldier, right? I mean, that's serious. It ain't taxes. There's no way. I mean, you could raise my taxes 100%. I'm sorry. I'm not picking up a gun and I'm not going to kill anybody. I'm not going to do it. There's got to be more to the story. So as I read, and as I have studied history, and when I first started espousing this theory, all my historical friends, my professor friends told me I was crazy and that I should drop it and there'd be no way. But there have since been a lot of books written on this topic. But there was a lot of atrocities that happened that the British inflicted on Americans. One of them was when they sent soldiers over here, they would come to your house and they would say, hey, I got 5 soldiers, you got 5 beds, they're staying with you. You're going to feed them and you're going to house them. Quartering, right? Well, would that be enough to make somebody want to fight? Maybe, but I still don't think so. But I got to thinking, what do you think happened when you had these testosterone-filled soldiers sleeping in your house and you have daughters? What do you think happened? There's actually books written on this. Bad stuff did happen. But I think one of the greatest examples of how men got fired up and all of a sudden did pick up a gun is Burgoyne. When Burgoyne was coming down from Canada, his goal was to link up with Clinton. They were going to have a huge army. It was going to cut the United States in half, and the whole movement was going to be over. And he made a mistake of hiring some Iroquois Indians. And these guys knew the landscape, they knew it well, and he said, I want you to go out and I want you to rape and pillage all these revolutionary colonials. Have at it, okay? And they did. And they raped and they pillaged. But they made a mistake. They couldn't tell the difference between a loyalist and a revolutionary. Didn't matter to them. They're both white, and they were going to get paid for the scalp regardless. And so they would literally chop the scalps, and they would get paid by Burgoyne's army for the scalps. Well, there was one little problem. One of the guys one of the loyalists who was in Burgoyne's army, he recognized one of those scalps. He thought, that scalp, that hair, looks an awful lot like my fiance's scalp. So he went home to find out what happened. Well, what happened to Mary McCrae is she was torn into 4 pieces. She was violently raped. And so that didn't go over so well with the loyalists. Didn't go over so well in Burgoyne's army. And so he had to fire the Iroquois and tell them, stay away from us. And it blinded him as he was moving through. Well, as you can imagine, American man got fired up. And I can remember sitting in church thinking, if somebody were going to attack my sisters, would the men of this church pick up guns and defend them? Absolutely they would. It's in our DNA. We are going to defend our families. We will die for our families, right? And there were so many men who did pick up their guns against Burgoyne's army. He said it was like looking at ants coming out of an anthill. There were so many American men. Any American red-blooded male that could pick up a gun to avenge Mary McRae did so, and the British Army was defeated that day, and Burgoyne got captured. Great story. But why is it so important? How did this happen? How did the origins of the American Revolution get watered down? Well, for one thing, rape is one of those topics that it's like, shh, we're not going to talk about that. Shh, don't do it. We can't tell children about this. So let's soften it up. Let's say it was taxation without representation. Sure, there was economic reasons why the American Revolution happened, but I don't think that's why Christian men picked up guns and fought. It's even in the Bible, in Romans 13. You can't rebel. The Apostle Paul said, do not rebel against your government. I mean, flat out, he said it. It's plain as day in Romans 13. And he said that when he was living under Rome. And that was a bad government, way worse than colonial Britain. But there definitely comes a point where a government becomes an agent of evil, and it becomes so bad and so horrible that not only do you have a right to rebel, you have a duty. And the British did horrible things to colonials, and I would encourage everyone to read it and study it, because if we don't understand the price that was paid for something, we have a tendency not to value it. And like, take for example your house. If you found out that your grandpa bought the house for $1 million, are you going to sell that house for anything less than $1 million? Probably not. You're going to value it. And I think one of the problems that we have today with our young people is they don't understand the price that has been paid for their freedom. And so they don't value it. And what you don't value, you don't defend, and you don't fight for it. And going to these political meetings, boring. There's so much more exciting things to do, right? But if they could understand that their freedom is at stake, and when you lose your freedom, what does tyranny look like? We don't know, but if you want to know what tyranny looks like, read about the experiences that some of these colonials went through. These British authorities, they could care less whether these colonials lived or died. There's just story after story of atrocity. And one last story I'll share real quick. Another Jeff Kelly theory that I have no proof for, okay? Zero. But Andrew Jackson, I've always been fascinated with Andrew Jackson. He was kind of like the Donald Trump of his time. And he had a big, ugly scar, and it went from his ear down to his chin. And that scar was delivered to him by a British officer. And Andrew Jackson hated the British. I mean, like pure, we're not talking about Alabama versus Georgia hate. We're talking about multiply that by like 100. He hated the British. And everybody says it was because he refused to shine the officer's shoes, and so the guy chopped him in the face, and that's why he had the ugly mark. I say BS. That's not enough. That officer had been quartered in his house, and there was no father in that house. And so I have a theory, I don't know this for a fact, I have nothing to substantiate it, but I have a feeling that officer had his way with Andrew Jackson's mama. And if there's anything that can motivate a man to carry some hatred for a long time, that is it. And so the Battle of New Orleans, one of my favorite stories ever, Andrew Jackson and a bunch of rednecks from the great state of Tennessee went down there, and they built a mud wall in Louisiana swamps, and they defeated the greatest British army that had ever been put on earth. The same army that defeated Napoleon came to New Orleans, and they got it handed to them because Andrew Jackson and a bunch of rednecks got behind that mud wall and they cut them to pieces. So there's a great song, I'll sing it real fast here. In 1814 we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. Took a little bacon and we took a little beans, and we fought the bloody British at the Battle of New Orleans. Fired our guns, but their British kept a-comin'. Wasn't quite as many as there was a while ago. Fired once more and they began a-running down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. So I want to conclude with study your history. Don't forget about the Maryland 400. We have to value our freedom, and we have to teach this next generation. They need to value their freedom. We need to educate them on what tyranny looks like, because if they don't understand the value, they're going to sell Grandpa's house for way cheaper than they otherwise should. All right?